Last year, we couldn't go 5 seconds of television without getting one of these thrown in our face. Last year, we couldn't watch 5 minutes of League Pass without getting one of these thrown in our face. They couldn't go to commercial break without throwing one of these in our face.
The WNBA is facing a storm it never expected. For years, league executives leaned on corporate partners and major media networks to push women's basketball into the spotlight. Disney, through ESPN and ABC, was supposed to be the steady hand, while Amazon was the shiny new partner bringing streaming credibility. But now the whispers have turned into full-blown alarm bells. Both Disney and Amazon are reportedly rethinking their commitments, threatening to scale back or even walk away from future TV rights. Without those lifelines, the league risks losing the visibility and money that have kept it afloat.
No Caitlin Clark. These companies wipe their hands of the WNBA. They're not gonna put time, they're not gonna put effort, they're not gonna put money.
Fans who once saw WNBA commercials, features, and highlights everywhere are noticing the silence. The question is no longer whether Caitlin Clark can save the league, but whether the league can survive without massive corporate backing. And the answer may be more brutal than anyone inside the WNBA wants to admit.
Other than a Nike commercial, other than a Gatorade commercial, how many commercials have you seen of companies putting WNBA players as the face of their commercial? I can't think of one.
When people talk about professional sports surviving long-term, one of the first things that comes up is broadcast rights. In today's landscape, television money isn't just a bonus, it's the backbone. For leagues like the NFL, NBA, and even Major League Baseball, billions flow in because networks know viewers will tune in. That money doesn't just pay players. It keeps the league relevant, creates sponsorships, and ensures that fans can't avoid seeing it. The WNBA, however, has always been different. For years, the league has relied on partnerships with companies like Disney through ESPN and ABC to put games in front of casual audiences. The hope was simple. If enough people saw it, maybe the WNBA would break through. But here's where the cracks begin to show. Last season, Caitlin Clark's arrival gave the league its first taste of mainstream attention in years. ESPN leaned into the hype, pushing highlight reels and promoting matchups that featured her Indiana Fever team.
That CarMax commercial, they ran that all Caitlin Clark's senior year at Iowa. They ran that all through the draft. They ran that all through last year. They ran that all through this year's draft. But we haven't seen it since Caitlin Clark has been down.
The numbers weren't just better, they were historic compared to the WNBA's past. Suddenly, you had people who never once cared about the league tuning in. Ticket prices spiked, jersey sales exploded, and broadcasts were actually outperforming other established sports. It seemed like the WNBA had finally turned the corner. The problem? That surge wasn't built on a broad foundation of interest across all teams and stars. It was tied almost entirely to Clark when she went down with a season-ending injury. The viewing numbers dipped almost immediately. Games that once crossed 1 million viewers dropped to a few 100,000. ESPN, which once devoted full segments on First Take and SportsCenter to hype up her highlights, barely gave other matchups a passing mention. The WNBA was once again a ghost on mainstream sports media, unless Clark was on the floor.
WNBA players are back to being ignored by corporations and companies. They're back to being in obscurity. With Caitlin Clark, rising tide lifts all boats, and she was the tide that lifted them all.
The interest collapsed, and corporations noticed. Disney isn't in the business of promoting sports that can't guarantee ratings. For them, the WNBA was supposed to be a long-term bet, a way to show they cared about diversity while still keeping advertisers happy. But advertisers don't pay for feel-good stories. They pay for eyeballs. Once Clark disappeared from the lineup, the buzz dropped. And suddenly, those million-dollar ad slots tied to WNBA broadcasts weren't worth nearly as much.
Ticket sales from $89 per ticket prior to Caitlin Clark's season-ending injury, down 30% to $62 a seat.
That's when the first whispers began to circulate that Disney might not renew its deal in full. Amazon, meanwhile, got involved with women's basketball because streaming platforms are desperate for live content. It's one of the only things people still watch in real time. But Amazon also knows numbers. If their streams don't deliver, they're not going to keep investing.
Let's talk about some of these ratings real quick. Fever Mercury from last Tuesday, 310,000. Fever Mystics from last Sunday, 270,000. The Fever Mystics on NBA TV got outdrew by women's college volleyball on the Big Ten Network. Oh boy. Wing Sparks, the game right after, 130,000. And the finale between the Sky and the Aces did 90,000 views.
Reports have suggested their executives are already reviewing whether the WNBA delivers enough return to justify the expense. If Disney cuts ties and Amazon follows, the WNBA won't just lose visibility, it'll lose its lifeline. And this is only the beginning of the unraveling. Because what comes next isn't just about contracts, it's about sponsors, commercials, and the league's overall relevance. Without TV backing, everything else begins to collapse.
And that goes into why they held off so long in announcing Caitlin Clark's season-ending injury, because they knew people would stop showing up. They knew the excitement and the interest would wind down.
One of the clearest signs of how fragile the WNBA's position really is can be seen in advertising. Commercials aren't just filler between games. They're proof that big corporations believe in a product enough to spend millions putting their brand next to it. Last season, you couldn't turn on ESPN or League Pass without being hit with back-to-back ads featuring WNBA stars. Aja Wilson was everywhere in CarMax spots. Sabrina Ionescu popped up in State Farm skits. And Sue Bird seemed to have a permanent place in every other promo. Those commercials weren't about selling cars or insurance alone. They were about attaching big-name companies to the idea that the WNBA was on the rise. But that illusion has faded quickly. With Caitlin Clark sidelined and ratings slipping, many of those same commercials have simply vanished from rotation. CarMax hasn't pushed new campaigns featuring WNBA athletes. State Farm, which once plastered Liberty stars across primetime, has barely included the league in its national spots. Fans who used to joke that they could recite those ads word for word now can't remember the last time they even saw one. It's not a coincidence. Corporations go where the momentum is, and right now, the WNBA isn't providing it. The Paige Buchers commercial is a perfect example. Instead of being blasted across ABC during big-time sporting events, it's relegated to League Pass streams. Seen only by the small niche audience already watching women's basketball, that's not national visibility, that's containment. For all the league's talk about growth, the reality is that sponsors aren't investing outside of Clark's bubble. And when Clark's not on the court, the money dries up. This is where Disney and Amazon's hesitation makes even more sense. If advertisers are already pulling back, why would networks keep giving away prime real estate? Airing WNBA games without ads lined up to cover the cost isn't just unprofitable, it's a guaranteed loss. Networks like ESPN live and die by ad revenue. When commercials vanish, executives don't see social justice progress or diversity initiatives, they see empty dollars. That's why the disappearance of those CarMax and State Farm campaigns is such a red flag. It shows that the hype wasn't organic league-wide support, but temporary corporate virtue signaling riding Clark's coattails. Even more damaging is the message this sends to casual fans. Last year, the omnipresence of WNBA commercials made it feel like the league was finally mainstream. You couldn't escape it. This year, the silence tells a different story. Out of sight, out of mind. Without constant reinforcement through advertising, casual audiences forget. And when casuals forget, the numbers nosedive. The WNBA's players may talk about progress, but behind closed doors, corporations are cutting their losses. Disney and Amazon are just the biggest names putting pressure on the league. If the sponsors disappear, the networks won't be far behind. And if the networks disappear, the WNBA won't just lose commercials, it could lose the stage entirely. And that's where the panic really starts to show. That sponsors leaving is only the first domino. The next one is the brutal collapse of ratings without Clark to carry the weight. Television ratings don't lie. They are the rawest form of truth in sports, the measurement that networks and advertisers use to decide whether something is worth their money. For the WNBA, Caitlin Clark's rookie season was supposed to be the breakthrough, and for a short time, it was Games featuring the Indiana Fever were pulling in over 1 million viewers on ESPN, sometimes even outperforming Major League Baseball. Clips went viral, highlights trended, and the league finally had what it always dreamed of, a national draw. But the dream didn't last. The moment Clark went down with a season-ending injury, the numbers crashed. Fever games without her plummeted into the 200,000 or 300,000 range. Some broadcasts were outdrawn by women's college volleyball, a sport with a fraction of the budget or promotion. Even NBA TV games, which Clark boosted to over 500,000 last year, dropped to half that without her presence. The excuse that it was just a Sunday slot or bad timing doesn't hold up, because the Fever had already proven they could compete against NFL games in primetime. The simple fact is this: without Clark, fans stop watching. For Disney, this is a nightmare scenario. ESPN can't justify devoting prime coverage to games pulling under 300,000 viewers when other sports can deliver triple or quadruple that number in the same window. Every hour spent on WNBA broadcasts without Clark is an hour where advertisers lose money and networks hate losing money. That's why executives are already questioning whether renewing the deal makes sense. Amazon faces the same dilemma. Live sports are supposed to be a streaming goldmine, one of the few types of programming that force people to watch in real time instead of skipping or binging later. But the WNBA doesn't deliver consistent numbers. It delivers Caitlin Clark numbers, and everything else is a steep drop-off. That inconsistency makes it impossible for Amazon to build a reliable streaming package around the league. Why pay top dollar for rights if only one player can guarantee an audience? The deeper issue is that these ratings expose the league's fragile foundation. For years, WNBA leaders claimed the problem was visibility, that if people just had the chance to see the product, they would fall in love with it. Clark's rise gave them that chance, and while fans flocked to her, they didn't stick around for the rest. The drop-off proves that interest is not spreading across the league. It is concentrated almost entirely in one player, and networks know it. That's what makes Disney and Amazon's hesitation so dangerous. Ratings are not just dipping, they are collapsing without Clark. And if numbers don't stabilize, the WNBA faces the possibility of losing its biggest broadcasting platforms. Altogether, but ratings are only one part of the story. The financial hit goes deeper, and the next sign of panic shows up where fans feel it most, in ticket sales in empty arenas. If ratings are the heartbeat of a league, then ticket sales are the pulse fans can see with their own eyes. Nothing tells the story of decline faster than empty arenas. And right now, the WNBA is feeling the pain. Just a few months ago, tickets to Indiana Fever games were some of the hottest in town. Prices skyrocketed on the secondary market as Caitlin Clark mania swept across the league. Fans were willing to spend nearly $250 a seat just to catch a glimpse of her in person. And for the first time in years, resellers were making money off WNBA tickets. That moment has vanished in the blink of an eye since Clark's injury. The average ticket price for Fever games has nosedived from nearly $90 to just over $60. On paper, that's a 30% drop, but the reality is even worse. Many fans who paid full price before the injury are now dumping their tickets at fire sale rates, taking a fraction of what they originally spent. Imagine paying $250 for a lower bowl seat and being forced to unload it for $62. That's not a discount, that's desperation. Fans aren't just losing money, they're losing interest. And once fans stop showing up, the energy inside those arenas evaporates. For the league, this collapse doesn't just hit at the gate. It ripples out into every other revenue stream. Empty arenas mean fewer concession sales, fewer jerseys being bought, and fewer reasons for local sponsors to invest. Hot dogs, popcorn, and merchandise don't sell when the seats are half empty. Stadium parking lots don't fill up. Local bars and restaurants don't see the same game day rush, and the whole ecosystem surrounding the WNBA starts to wither. The league desperately needs fans in the building to keep that energy alive. And without Clark, the draw just isn't there. This also explains why the WNBA was so slow to announce Clark's season-ending status. They knew the moment the news broke, ticket sales would crater. Every extra day they could sell seats before fans realized the star attraction was gone meant more short-term revenue. It was a calculated gamble. Hold off on confirming the injury to squeeze a few more weeks of sales. But in the long run, that kind of strategy erodes trust. Fans eventually catch on, and when they feel misled, they don't just stay home, they stop spending altogether. Disney and Amazon are watching this closely. Networks don't just care about TV audiences. They care about optics. Empty seats on camera make broadcasts look second-rate, and that perception can kill interest faster than low ratings. When viewers tune in and see rows of vacant chairs, it sends the message that even local fans don't care enough to show up. And if local fans won't buy in, why should national networks? The decline in ticket sales is more than just a temporary dip. It's a flashing red warning light that the WNBA's growth was built on fragile hype. And the consequences don't stop at the gate. They're about to crash headfirst into the league's financial stability. Because when arenas are empty and broadcasts are flat, the sponsors holding the purse strings start backing away even faster. When a league begins to stumble, the first groups to flee are always the sponsors. They're not in the business of loyalty or long-term development, they're in the business of making money. And right now, money and the WNBA no longer fit in the same sentence without Caitlin Clark. For years, league executives bragged about finally securing deals with recognizable brands. CarMax, State Farm, Nike, Gatorade, and even a handful of local companies were paraded as proof that the WNBA was on the rise. These partnerships were marketed not just as financial wins, but as cultural validation. If big corporations believed in the league, surely the audience would follow. But here's the brutal reality. Those sponsors weren't buying the WNBA, they were buying Caitlin Clark. They were buying the media buzz she generated, the viral highlights that flooded social media, and the once-in-a-generation ability she had to make casual sports fans care. Without her on the floor, that buzz has evaporated, and the sponsors are noticing. CarMax hasn't rolled out a single new campaign featuring WNBA athletes this year. State Farm's commercials, once a constant reminder of Liberty stars like Sabrina Ionescu, have all but disappeared from primetime television. Even Nike and Gatorade, two of the league's most visible partners, are shifting their focus back toward Clark specifically, rather than the league at large. The fallout is devastating because sponsorships are more than a paycheck. They're an image builder. They keep the league visible during NFL broadcasts, NBA halftimes, and primetime shows. Without them, the WNBA loses cultural real estate, and that's exactly what's happening. Last season, fans couldn't escape the ads. Now silence. It's a vacuum. And in the world of marketing, silence is a death sentence. Disney and Amazon understand this better than anyone. Networks aren't charities. They rely on advertisers to cover broadcast costs. If sponsors don't want to pay for ad slots during WNBA games, then networks have zero incentive to air them. Why would Disney continue dedicating hours of programming to games that don't attract sponsors? Why would Amazon waste streaming bandwidth if there's no corporate interest to offset the costs? The exodus of sponsors doesn't just hurt the league's bottom line, it makes TV rights themselves nearly worthless. And fans are noticing too. The lack of commercials reinforces the perception that the league is slipping back into irrelevance. When fans saw WNBA players in national campaigns, it felt like progress. Now, the absence of those campaigns sends the opposite message, that the WNBA is no longer worth the investment. This kind of backslide is hard to recover from, because once corporations walk away, convincing them to return becomes an uphill battle. The WNBA can insist it's growing, but sponsorship dollars tell the real story. And if Disney and Amazon are already questioning their partnerships, it's because they've seen the writing on the wall. Without Clark, the league isn't delivering the numbers, and without numbers, sponsors vanish. What happens next is even darker, because the financial strain is starting to expose the WNBA's dependence on smoke and mirrors. When Caitlin Clark went down with her injury, fans expected the news to break quickly. After all, in most professional sports, transparency is standard. Teams update injury reports daily, and the league keeps fans in the loop. But in this case, something felt different. Weeks went by without a clear announcement, leaving fans speculating and hoping she might return. Only later did the truth come out. Clark's season was finished. By then, thousands of tickets had already been sold. Arenas had booked games expecting. Packed crowds and sponsors had budgeted for a full season of Clark-driven momentum. This wasn't a coincidence, it was business. The WNBA, fully aware of the financial disaster that Clark's absence would cause, delayed confirming the inevitable. Every extra day they withheld the truth meant more tickets sold at premium prices and more short-term revenue secured. The league was essentially cashing in on fan loyalty, knowing full well the excitement would collapse once the official news broke. It was a gamble to protect the bottom line, but it also exposed the WNBA's desperation. This strategy raises serious questions about trust. Fans who spent hundreds of dollars expecting to see Clark now feel misled. Resellers who invested in bulk tickets lost money when the value tanked. Local businesses that counted on game day crowds saw demand plummet. By trying to squeeze out a few more weeks of profit, the league may have alienated the very people it needed most. The loyal supporters willing to put money down. Networks like Disney and Amazon also took notice. For broadcasters, credibility is everything. If a league is perceived as hiding information or manipulating fans for revenue, that becomes a liability. Advertisers don't want to be tied to controversy, and networks don't want to carry the burden of explaining away fan backlash. When Disney evaluates whether to renew WNBA rights, this kind of maneuver becomes part of the calculation. Do they really want to invest in a league that relies on delay and deception to survive a season? On a deeper level, this entire episode reveals how fragile the WNBA's business model really is. One player's injury shouldn't cause ticket sales, ratings, sponsorships, and credibility to collapse simultaneously. But that's exactly what happened, because Clark was the league's golden goose. By hiding her status, the league was admitting just how dependent it had become, and that dependence is now pushing Disney and Amazon closer to the exit. The fallout doesn't end there. Fans aren't just upset, they're skeptical. Even when Clark returns, many will wonder if they can trust the league's announcements. That doubt lingers, and once trust is broken, it rarely comes back. For a league fighting to prove itself legitimate, that's a devastating blow. And this leads to the bigger question hanging over everything. Can the WNBA survive if its entire foundation rests on one player? Or will Disney and Amazon decide the gamble is too risky and walk away before the illusion collapses completely? For years, league executives have repeated the same message. If the WNBA just had more visibility, more fans would follow. They believed that lack of exposure was the only obstacle holding women's basketball back. Give it airtime on ESPN, stream it on Amazon, put the players in commercials, and suddenly the league would break through into the mainstream. For a while, Caitlin Clark seemed to prove them right. The cameras followed her everywhere, social media clipped every highlight, and ratings jumped in ways the WNBA had never seen before. But when she went down with her injury, the theory collapsed because the interest didn't spread across the league. It stayed tied to her. This is the core problem with WNBA marketing. It's not about the league, it's about one person. Disney and Amazon know it, sponsors know it, and fans can feel it. The commercials featuring Aja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, or Sue Bird only worked because Clark's buzz created an environment where those ads felt relevant. Without her, those campaigns dried up. And suddenly, the league returned to the same place it's been for decades, struggling to matter in the broader sports conversation. For Disney, this poses a nightmare scenario. When ESPN promotes the NBA, NFL, or MLB, it's promoting entire leagues with multiple marketable stars. Fans can tune in to see LeBron James, Steph Curry, Giannis, or a dozen others. But in the WNBA, casual audiences only tune in for Clark. That isn't sustainable. If Disney continues to pour resources into WNBA rights, they risk spending millions only to see ratings spike when one player's healthy and collapse the moment she's not. That kind of instability makes advertisers nervous and networks cautious. Amazon faces the same problem. Streaming platforms thrive on consistency. If one game pulls 1 million views but the next barely cracks 200,000, it's impossible to build momentum. Investors don't like uncertainty, and the WNBA right now is nothing but uncertain. Without Clark, Amazon's bet on women's basketball looks like a costly experiment with no guaranteed return. Even the league's own players are aware of the imbalance. They talk about growth, but deep down, they know it's Clark driving the ticket sales, the jersey purchases, and the national buzz. Without her, they slide back into obscurity. and that's a bitter pill to swallow. The WNBA wanted to prove that the product itself was strong enough to stand on its own. Instead, it's proving that one superstar can mask the league's shortcomings, but only temporarily. This is why Disney and Amazon's hesitation feels like a turning point. If the WNBA can't market itself beyond Caitlin Clark, networks have little reason to keep investing. And if those networks walk away, the illusion of momentum disappears overnight. The league would be left exposed. Forced to confront the uncomfortable truth, it has built its entire identity on a single player. And that's not a foundation, that's a house of cards. And with that foundation crumbling, the panic inside the league isn't just about contracts, it's about survival itself. Every league eventually hits a defining moment, a crossroads where survival depends on more than slogans and hype. For the WNBA, that moment is now. With Disney and Amazon threatening to walk away from TV rights, the league is staring at the harshest reality it has ever faced, without major broadcast partners. There may be no national stage left. For years, executives leaned on the idea that corporate backing would shield them from failure. Disney gave the league credibility. Amazon gave it innovation, and together they kept the WNBA in the public eye. But those partnerships weren't unconditional. They were investments, and investments demand returns. The problem is, the WNBA's returns have been built almost entirely on Caitlin Clark. Her rise gave the illusion of league-wide growth, but her absence revealed the truth. Ratings tanked, ticket sales collapsed, sponsors pulled ads, and the excitement evaporated. Disney and Amazon don't need to look at the league's statements or promotional campaigns to make a decision. The numbers are already telling the story, and the story is ugly. For Disney, sticking with the WNBA means sacrificing airtime that could be used on more profitable sports. Every underperforming broadcast hurts their bottom line and frustrates advertisers. For Amazon, the calculus is even simpler. If the WNBA can't consistently deliver viewership, the streaming experiment isn't worth the cost. The threats to walk away aren't empty. They're warnings that the networks are done waiting for the league to prove itself. This is the breaking point, because it exposes how unprepared the WNBA is to stand on its own. If those broadcast deals disappear, the league isn't just losing exposure, it's losing the foundation of its business model. Without TV money, player salaries shrink, sponsorships disappear, and the already thin margins of franchise owners collapse. Teams that barely break even now could quickly find themselves underwater. The idea of expansion, which executives love to float as a sign of growth, becomes a fantasy. Instead of adding teams, the league could be fighting just to keep the doors open. There is no backup plan. The WNBA has no secondary revenue stream strong enough to replace broadcast rights. Merchandise, sales, ticket revenue, and grassroots promotions can't sustain a professional league at this level. Without the Disney and Amazon deals, the entire operation risks unraveling. Fans who once believed they were watching the beginning of a golden era may soon realize they were only watching a temporary wave carried by one player. The WNBA wanted to prove it could be a permanent fixture in American sports, but unless something changes fast, history may look back on this moment as the peak before the collapse, because if Disney and Amazon quit, the panic inside the WNBA won't just be about bad optics or bad press. It will be about survival itself, and survival, in this case, is far from guaranteed. The WNBA has reached a crossroads it cannot ignore. For a brief moment, Caitlin Clark's stardom gave the league the appearance of unstoppable momentum-packed arenas, soaring ratings, and corporate sponsors lining up to cash in. But with her sidelined, that momentum has collapsed, exposing how dependent the league truly is on one player. Now, Disney and Amazon, the two biggest lifelines keeping the WNBA on national screens, are threatening to walk away. Without their support, sponsorships vanish. Ratings continue to plummet, and the league's fragile foundation risks crumbling altogether. This isn't just about one bad season. It's about the survival of the WNBA itself. Fans, networks, and corporations have all made one thing clear. Without Clark, the league struggles to matter. And if the networks pull the plug, the future of women's basketball at the professional level may never recover from the blow.